Beneath the dark curtain of World War II emerged a beast that sought to redefine naval warfare. Surcouf, with a length of meters and over tons submerged, this French giant was conceived not as a mere convoy hunter, but as a submarine cruiser capable of engaging merchant ships and escorts with the firepower of a surface warship. Its design made it a hybrid monster, mounting 2 guns in a watertight turret, identical to those of a heavy cruiser. And furthermore, it housed a seaplane in its rear hangar to explore horizons beyond the reach of any periscope. In the eyes of its creators, the Surcouf was France's response to the limits imposed by naval treaties, an unexpected weapon to terrorize entire oceans. Yet, behind this grandeur lay serious flaws that would ultimately tarnish the legend of the largest submarine of its time. After the Great War, nations sought to curb the arms race that had devastated Europe. The Washington Treaty limited the tonnage of battleships and cruisers, and the London Treaty deepened those restrictions. But submarines remained outside these regulations. The British, traumatized by the U-boat blockade, proposed banning them. France, in contrast, with its vast, scattered colonial empire, demanded tons of submarine construction. With no agreement reached, a legal loophole emerged, and it was in this gap that French engineers saw their opportunity. If they couldn't build new battleships, they would create a submarine with the same firepower. The name chosen was no coincidence. Surcouf, in honor of the legendary privateer Robert Surcouf, who in the century had sunk and captured dozens of British merchant ships, a symbol of audacity and the French predatory spirit. On November, the Cherbourg arsenal unveiled to the world an unprecedented creation. The Surcouf, its reign as the giant of the depths would last until the arrival of the Japanese but its size was only the first surprise. Forward of the conning tower stood an armored mount with 2 guns capable of firing kg shells over a range of more than kilometers. After the bridge, a watertight hangar housed a Besson MB seaplane designed for reconnaissance and fire correction. This impossible blend of submarine, cruiser, and seaplane carriers seemed straight out of science fiction. In an era when submarines were mere submerged predators with torpedoes, the Surcouf could strike from the surface and vanish like a ghost beneath the waves, an ambition as dazzling as it was risky. The Surcouf's specifications reinforced this outsized vision: 10 torpedo tubes for at the bow, and 6 mounted on rotating platforms on the deck, a range of nautical miles and endurance for days, without returning to port. Over men served aboard, organized almost like a cruiser's crew. It even had cells for prisoners, and a motor launch for boarding operations. Its arsenal and endurance made it a global predator, capable of sinking merchant ships, launching torpedoes at escorts, and even capturing vessels intact. But such complexity was also its downfall. Its massive size made it slow when submerging. Its systems demanded constant maintenance, and the guns, positioned too low, drastically reduced their effective range in combat. The dream of a total weapon began to reveal it could also be a monster, unwieldy. During its early years of service, the Surcouf visited colonial ports and strategic allies, traveling over miles in tours showcasing French naval power. However, these ceremonial deployments could not hide the harsh reality. The submarine suffered serious issues. It took too long to dive, a fatal weakness in an era when aviation was beginning to dominate the seas. Violent rolling in rough seas caused battery acid to spill, filling compartments with toxic gases, and its guns, though imposing, had a practical range far below expectations. Engineers soon realized they had created a powerful but inefficient beast. French pride had become a floating enigma, colossus in appearance, fragile in performance. When World War II broke out in September, The Surcouf was stationed in the French West Indies. The outbreak of the conflict forced it to return to France, but it barely reached Brest when a litany of breakdowns left it stranded in port. Its diesel engines were out of service, and the rudder jammed. In that state, it was incapable of diving. Just as the Wehrmacht advanced toward the coast, Captain Paul Martin made a desperate decision to attempt crossing the English Channel, using only the electric motors and an improvised rudder. It was a slow and perilous odyssey, a submarine giant, moving at a snail's pace, exposed to enemy aircraft and enemy destroyers. On June, it miraculously reached Plymouth, but the ship was so damaged that, at low tide, it rested on the harbor bottom, a broken colossus that had barely escaped falling into German hands. The future of the Surcouf became even more uncertain after France's capitulation. Churchill, fearing that the Vichy fleet would fall under Nazi control, ordered Operation Catapult, a preemptive strike against French ships in various ports. While in Mers el-Kabir, the tragedy claimed over lives. In Plymouth, the fate of the Surcouf was decided by boarding. At a.m. on July, 3 British launches with men, Marines, armed officers and sailors, headed to the submarine. The French had sealed all accesses, except one, defended by armed sentries. When the British stormed in, the tension escalated immediately. An intercepted note, contradictory orders, and suspicion of sabotage triggered a close-quarters firefight in the narrow corridors. When the chaos ended, Captain Sprague lay dead, along with several British sailors and French officers. The Surcouf had become an international tragedy, with the original crew neutralized or repatriated. The Surcouf passed to Free France under the command of Georges-Louis Blazon. However, the new crew was mostly composed of sailors, with no submarine experience, much less on such a complex vessel. The results were catastrophic. In its first trials, the crew forgot to close valves before blowing ballast tanks, causing uncontrolled dives. On another occasion, it departed with the conning tower hatch open and saltwater flooded compartments, reacting with battery acid and generating clouds of deadly chlorine. The chaos on board was such that several men were hospitalized for poisoning. The British Navy watched in horror. For the admirals, the Surcouf was no longer a revolutionary weapon, but a danger to its own fleet. Distrust grew, but political pressure from de Gaulle forced its continued service, even if it was more a symbol than a war tool. Despite its disastrous record, the Surcouf was used in symbolic operations to show Free France still stood. In December, accompanied by 3 corvettes, it took part in the capture of Saint-Pierre and Miquelon, a colonial archipelago off Newfoundland under Vichy control. A political coup. The operation was executed on Christmas Eve, without firing a single shot, and ended with a plebiscite that sealed the island's allegiance to the Gaullist cause. But the propaganda triumph sparked a diplomatic storm. The United States, which had negotiated with Vichy the neutrality of its colonies in the hemisphere, protested vehemently, and Churchill himself reprimanded de Gaulle for acting without authorization. The Surcouf, far from being a national pride, had become a political burden. The Allies tolerated it reluctantly as an awkward relic, symbolizing more diplomatic tensions than military victories. And yet, its most dangerous journey was still to come. In January, when the war in the Pacific erupted after Pearl Harbor, the Surcouf received unusual orders. It had to cross the Panama Canal and head to Tahiti and New Caledonia. The idea of sending a problematic submarine with only one engine functioning to cross half the world seemed suicidal. By then, its seaplane barely functioned. The listening equipment was inoperable, and the ammunition for its guns was scarce. The atmosphere on board was chaotic. The British liaison officers feared for their safety. describing the crew as undisciplined, alcoholic, and hostile. Even so, on February, it sailed from Bermuda toward the Caribbean. 6 days later, it vanished forever. The official version claimed it was accidentally rammed by the American freighter Thomson Likes on the night of February. But the calculations, contradictory reports, and the mystery of its missing wreckage turned the disappearance of the Surcouf into one of the war's most unsettling enigmas. The official report on the Surcouf's disappearance seemed too convenient. According to the accepted version, the American freighter Thomson Likes accidentally rammed it on the night of February in Caribbean waters, causing its immediate sinking. But analyzing the timeline raised doubts impossible to ignore. At the actual speed it could achieve with one engine, the Surcouf could not have reached the collision site in the recorded time. Moreover, the damage to the freighter was minimal for a collision with a submarine over tons. Just dented plates and a pierced tank. No floating wreckage or crew bodies were found. Even stranger, witnesses on board claimed the object they hit burst into flames, something incompatible with a diesel submarine. The official explanation seemed more like a political closure than a military truth. These inconsistencies fueled alternative theories. Some pointed to American aviation. Later documents revealed that, on the morning of February, a squadron of bombers based in Panama reported attacking a large submarine in the Caribbean, convinced they had sunk a German U-boat. What if it was actually the Surcouf, mistaken for an enemy after a possible prior collision? This hypothesis fit with the lack of wreckage at the supposed collision site. Other rumors pointed directly to deliberate sabotage. Admiral Kennedy Purvis in Bermuda had declared his intent to rid himself of the Surcouf due to its failures and its unreliable crew. There are even suspicions that magnetic explosives had been placed on its hull before departure. In times of total war, it wasn't impossible that an inconvenient ship was silently sacrificed for political and military convenience. The mystery deepened with the investigations of retired American Captain Frederick Hayes. After years of reviewing archives, he concluded that the Surcouf was never headed to the Pacific. According to him, the secret plan of its commander was to divert course to Martinique, then under Vichy control, where it could take refuge, join French forces, loyal to Pétain, and perhaps obtain spare parts to repair its engines. The theory gained traction when a puzzling episode was uncovered. In May, 3 months after its official disappearance, an American Catalina seaplane attacked and sank a giant submarine off Martinique. The pilot swore it was over feet long and bore the Cross of Lorraine on its conning tower. The Surcouf carried exactly that emblem, had it survived hidden in Martinique, until being destroyed by its own allies. The account of pilot Edward Vinnell is disturbing. According to his report, the submarine was barely moving at knots when it was caught by his depth charges. The vessel surfaced bow first before sinking vertically in waters over meters deep. The attack earned him the Navy Cross for sinking a German U-boat. But decades later, upon reviewing Navy Cross records, it was proven that no German submarine was lost that day in that area. So, what did he really sink? If it was the Surcouf, it would mean it survived 3 months after its official disappearance, hidden in the Caribbean, until falling victim to friendly fire. The possibility aligned with another unsettling detail. The German U was in the area, awaiting a rendezvous with an ally. When no one appeared, it departed for France after the longest patrol in its history. Was it waiting in vain for the Surcouf? The fate of the Colossus became a puzzle of versions, interests and silences. For the British, the accident explanation avoided admitting sabotage of an inconvenient ally. For the Americans, it spared them from admitting they might have sunk a friendly submarine by mistake. For the French, it offered an honorable narrative of sacrifice in combat, without the shame of desertion to Vichy. Each power found relief in the official version. But for the families of the missing sailors, the lack of wreckage, and the tangle of versions, an endless torment, the truth perhaps, sank with them somewhere in the Caribbean. And so, the Surcouf went from being France's greatest technological gamble to a steel ghost, buried in mystery, whose shadow still looms over the enigmas of naval warfare. The tragedy of the Surcouf was not limited to its mysterious disappearance. It was also the reflection of a technological gamble ahead of its time, doomed by design flaws and the distrust of its allies. For the British Royal Navy, that behemoth was more a risk than an asset. Slow to dive, hard to maintain, and crewed by sailors deemed undisciplined. For the Americans, its mere presence in the Caribbean represented a dilemma. While German U-boats devastated their trade routes, the Surcouf sailed with a crew divided by loyalties, plagued by mechanical issues and rumors of espionage. In that climate of suspicion, it's no surprise its end was shrouded in secrecy. The French Colossus, meant to be a national pride, ended up perceived as a dangerous liability. In the midst of total war, its enigma grew over the years. In France, the Surcouf's disappearance was seen as an open wound. The submarine, meant to symbolize the nation's naval greatness, vanished without a trace. In the United Kingdom, the accident narrative was firmly defended, aware that admitting sabotage would have sparked a diplomatic scandal amid the alliance against Hitler. In the United States, military archives mentioned the collision with the freighter, but scattered reports from patrol planes and naval bases suggested another reality. The Cold War later buried the documents. Even further, each nation preferred to maintain the mystery rather than uncover responsibilities. With that, the Surcouf went from an experimental ship to a legend, a ghost that fueled theories for decades. The submarine's magnitude made it impossible to forget. No other ship of its time combined guns, a seaplane hangar, and a range of miles. It was a hybrid between cruiser and submersible, a concept as revolutionary as it was problematic. For its crew, serving on it was a constant challenge. Complex systems, unsafe diving, battery acid leaks, and a questioned discipline that undermined cohesion. French ambition had created a weapon that the world was not yet prepared to operate. Its sinking, whether by accident, air attack, or sabotage, also symbolized the failure of a dream of naval supremacy. Built in the Surcouf became a warning that innovation without reliability can be as deadly as enemy fire. The memory of the Surcouf was relegated to a corner of history, though it never fully faded. In France posthumously awarded it the Resistance Medal with Rosette, seeking to honor a crew lost in murky circumstances. In Cherbourg, where it was built, a simple monument commemorated the lost sailors, with a solemn inscription that still moves today, to the memory of the Surcouf's crew, lost in the Atlantic, February. That gesture sought to heal wounds, but in reality, it kept the mystery alive, because that memorial was not built over confirmed remains, but over an absence, over a silence that neither the sea nor the archives would break. Over time, the figure of the Surcouf inspired books, articles, and passionate debates. Some portrayed it as a victim of a fatal error. Others turned it into a symbol of betrayal or secret intrigues among allies. The lack of conclusive evidence gave it an almost mythological aura. For naval historians, it remains an open case, comparable to the greatest mysteries of World War II. For the public, it is the story of a steel giant that vanished in the night, leaving questions that perhaps will never find answers. Its shadow stretches over the Caribbean and over France's collective memory, reminding us that even machines built to project absolute power can be swallowed by the fog of mystery. The Surcouf was not just a lost submarine. It was the embodiment of the limits of human ambition. In French Navy veteran circles, the Surcouf was remembered with mixed feelings. For some, it represented a truncated pride, a ship that embodied France's ability to dream big. For others, it was a bitter warning about what happens when politics and propaganda outweigh military effectiveness. For years, in port taverns and old sailors' gatherings, anecdotes about that colossus were shared. Its guns that could barely be used in open seas, its clumsiness in diving, the clashes between French and British crew members on board. Over time, each story added more mystery, and the line between reality and legend blurred. The Surcouf was no longer just a lost submarine. It was a myth that spoke of pride, failure, and silence in the Caribbean, where its trace was lost. The warm waters hide secrets that still fascinate explorers and historians. On several occasions, research teams have tried to locate its remains using state-of-the-art sonar and remotely operated underwater vehicles. However, to this day, no discovery has conclusively confirmed the location of the wreckage. Some believe it lies at great depth, fragmented after an explosion. Others claim it was diverted to the Martinique coast and later destroyed in secret. Some even speculate it may have been hidden for political reasons, to cover up an Allied mistake. The lack of tangible evidence keeps the intrigue alive and turns each failed expedition into a reminder that the sea jealously guards its secrets. The Surcouf also became a protagonist in the cultural sphere. Writers and journalists made it a recurring character of World War II, a symbol of the extraordinary and the inexplicable. Its story appeared in novels, documentaries, and chronicles blending reality with fantasy. In many of them, it was portrayed as an invulnerable giant that vanished into the shadows, or as a victim of conspiracies involving the British, Americans, and even Soviets. Each new version fueled public curiosity, reinforcing the idea that this submarine was far more than a ship. Its sleek silhouette, with its seaplane hangar and inch guns, seemed straight out of science fiction, making it the perfect protagonist for epic narratives and impossible theories. For the Allies who fought in the Atlantic, the Surcouf was always an awkward element. In the midst of total war, there was no room for doubt, and that submarine generated it all. Its disappearance, more than an isolated tragedy, became a relief for some commanders who never considered it reliable. However, the human cost, undeniable. Men vanished in a dark night, without a known grave or answers for their families. That duality between distrust of the ship and respect for the sailors who crewed its fuels. Even today, debates among historians. Was it an accident, a mistake, a deliberate attack, a thwarted desertion? No one knows for certain. The only clear thing is that the Surcouf never fulfilled the destiny it was conceived for, and ended up as one of the greatest naval mysteries of the century. The mystery of the Surcouf perfectly encapsulates the paradox of the war, between innovation and disaster, between glory and oblivion. Conceived to be a revolutionary weapon, it ended up sunk by the reality of distrust, technical failures, and the shadows of politics. Its story is, ultimately, that of a dream too grand for the time it was born. Today, the Cherbourg Monument and the pages of books are all that keep it alive, along with the questions that remain unanswered. What really happened that night in February? Accident, sabotage, or betrayal? The sea, eternal guardian of secrets, still refuses to answer. And perhaps therein lies the true strength of this story, in reminding us that even in a war marked by brutal facts and precise figures, there is still room for enigmas that will never be resolved.